Welcome back to Morning Express on this 30th day of November 2016, and it's time for us to get into the newsroom where we look at how we have done our job, we members of the Fourth Estate, and to have that conversation, I'll introduce the panel that we have this morning. To my extreme left, we have Eric Latif, who is a journalist. Good morning, and thank you for joining us.
Morning, Mike.
We also have Eric Odor, who's the Secretary General at the Kenya Union of Journalists. Good morning, and thank you for joining us. As we continue, we have Victor Bwire, who is the Deputy CEO for Media Council of Kenya, who will also be joining us as we continue with the conversation, but we'll start all the same. Now, the question that we were running this morning, the interactive question is media suppression a global problem? And of course, that is first of all based on what happened on Sunday, I believe it was, where we had one of our journalists arrested. And there you have the question, is media suppression a global problem? Do let us know what your thoughts are via Twitter, and we'll be reading through them and having that discussion. We'll also open up the phone lines for you to participate in this conversation as we continue with the show, just to hear what your take is and what you'd like to say. But that being the question, of course, it's on the background of having Joy Doreen, one of our very own, arrested on Sunday. And this is after she posted some pictures of what was happening in Uganda. And of course, the question would be whether it was against the law. And that's one of the questions that we're going to be continuing. But let me start, first of all, by just hearing from you, gentlemen. And I'll start with you, Eric, on your thoughts on what happened on Sunday. I'm sure you've been following up and you know what happened, but just your thoughts on that whole thing, because it's not the first time it's happened.
Which Eric?
The two Erics. Latif. I beg your pardon.
Well, first, it's actually quite sad what's happened in Uganda. That whole back and forth between the kingdom and the national government. And what transpired, leading to the deaths and the destruction of property, is quite sad, and it's quite a big story. It's something that needs to be covered nicely and understood deeply to understand what are the issues and what led to this, and how long has this been simmering under. Now, to the issue of Joy Doreen being there and posting and getting arrested, of course it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that anyone would get arrested because of posting what they've posted. Because now it's not just looking at Joy Doreen as a journalist, but looking at Joy Doreen as a citizen, as somebody who has come across something that's happening. She takes pictures, she posts it. That's the new world. You'll come across something. In fact, citizen journalism is now the bigger thing. You know, people come across something, they take pictures. You can broadcast. You can actually Facebook Live.
Right.
You can go live on an event from wherever you are. It's about the authorities at that point missing the whole point, missing the point that it will be covered. Whether it's covered by a journalist, whether it's covered by a known reporter, whether it's covered by an ordinary citizen, whether it's just an ordinary citizen who takes pictures and shares in their group, or who takes pictures and broadcasts them on a social platform, or just somebody who calls their neighbors and says, this is what's happening, it's going to be reported. These are not the days when news and information was only restricted to media platforms.
Right.
Media is actually broader now.
All right. Eric Odor.
Yes.
Your thoughts on basically what happened?
Yes, looking at what happened in Uganda and looking at the issues in Kasese, just like my colleague has said, the confrontation between the kingdom and the national government, that means that there are a lot of issues that need to be discussed, and probably the government didn't want this information to get out there. And looking at what Bira was doing, basically what she was doing, she was just trying to share information with the whole world, what was happening in Kasese. And also journalism, first of all, you must also reckon that a journalist is also a human rights defender. And looking at human rights violations that were taking place in Kasese, there were deaths there. And obvious, the government would not want this information to go out there, people to know that how many people were killed. Because, of course, that place there was a total lockdown. Nobody could actually access that information. But given that Bira happened to be in the area.
She happened to be in the location.
Exactly. So she was sharing this information because other journalists actually had been locked out, were not allowed to access that area. And therefore, the government probably felt threatened that the violation that was taking place there was going to be given out and everybody was going to get that information.
Okay. Victor Bwire joining us now, and welcome, sir, for joining us. And yeah, your thoughts on basically what happened in Uganda and the fact that Joy Doreen was arrested just for posting what was going on.
Thank you, Mike. One, it's sad that that happened. That wouldn't necessarily need to have happened, and Doreen had to go through what she went. I mean, it's a sad story, and it's a story that quite a number of our own journalists are going through globally and even in Kenya. So it's a challenge that we need to be aware of and live with, and it poses those challenges of journalists, one, reporting from hostile environments, and two, the fact that journalists who have been, and Eric needs to now start working as KJ and others, because those are laws that are in our statutes. That quite a number of funny provisions have been sneaked in various laws that are not necessarily journalist laws, but they are hidden in other laws that once something happens, then you see a very funny charge coming out. So you look at how Doreen is arrested, he's charged under terrorism-related matter, and that provision is in the Terrorism Act, actually. But if you look at the media law and rest, and that happens even in our own country here. If you look at the Prevention of Terrorism Act of 2012, there's a whole section that deals with if journalist takes a photo, he will be charged for 30 years in jail. And when that was being passed, journalists were never interrogated some of them. If we look at our own National Intelligence Act, again, there's a provision similar to what happened. So that's already a wake-up call that we need to be aware to keep a tab on even other laws that have provisions that would risk the life of journalists per se. But again, we are also appealing to journalists that security agencies also need to wake up and start dealing with journalist information in this age, digital age, that the security is not going to be dealt with as they did before when they could completely lock out a place and think people will not know what is happening outside. It might be during this time. In some of the areas in Somalia, for example, it's even the own soldiers who share some of those photos.
Right.
So the age of controlling and holding on to information is no longer there. So they must wake up that you can't kill people of such magnitude and imagine that will not happen.
Okay.
You remember that happened with Westgate when everybody was blaming Kenya media that they blew up. But how does such an incident happen and you expect media to keep quiet?
And mum about it.
I mean,
and that again now forms the next train of thought I'd like us maybe to discuss. And Eric Odor, maybe in regards to the government always uses the security word as an excuse. For instance, Uganda, or if I even come back home, when we look at Elade, we had quite a number of bloggers and journalists arrested just for posting pictures, and the excuse was that this is a security issue. At what point do we draw that line where, because again, there is responsible journalism where you would not want to get information out that would put anybody at risk?
What happens, or what should happen is that there should be some level of information sharing. If at all there has been an attack, and the public always be anxious, they want to know what exactly is happening. So that is upon the government now to open the communication channels to ensure that information is shared with the public at the right time. But what we've seen, there has always been confrontation between journalists and the government or by the security officers, because from their end, they try to conceal information. But for the journalists, they want the public to know, to get that information. And if you look at what actually happens whenever we have such kind of such cases, we always see people trying to look for that information. People will go on social media, people will be tuning into radio stations, TV stations, and trying to even go to the website just to find out what is happening. I can tell you, like the Westgate attack. Westgate attack happened when I was not around. I was in a foreign country, and there was an alert that had been sent by one of the international media. So I'm just wondering that if in that kind of situation where you want to get to know what is happening at home, so you go to website, you go to a nation website, go to Standard Nation website, you go to Capital website, trying to look for that information. So I assume that anybody who is looking for that kind of information will be doing that.
Would probably do the same.
Yeah, so exactly what is important is that whenever we have these cases, it's upon the security or those people who are handling that situation to open communication channels immediately to make sure that there is flow information from what is happening to the public.
But from experience, we've seen that governments are normally very reluctant to get that information out. Eric, Latif, and I think I'll have to now refer to Odor and Latif because they're two Erics. But Latif, yeah, the government obviously is normally very slow to get that information out for obvious reasons. So do we go ahead now and also maybe scrutinize them on that particular?
Yes, I think actually saying for obvious reasons, it's rather obvious that they are slow, right? And
it might be by design that they're slow.
And it's completely misinformed. Look, the corporate world has for a long time, in various sectors of the corporate world have for a long time, tried to be very guarded with their information. But then they realized that lack of information is actually dangerous for you because people will take up whatever information they get and they'll consume that. So if you look at the corporate world, they have corporate communication and communication agencies and PR agencies that are employed to make sure that information is actually not being reactive but proactive, that an organization is the one that's churning out its story. So whatever you hear is from my side. Try and manage that. And that's what the government should try and do. We have a lot of communication departments in every ministry, or actually in every ministry department. There's a communication department. But they still have the old mindset, like Bwire is saying, you're still thinking the old times, how to deal with information in an era where information is key and information is now freely accessible. The government should think of how to make sure that, and in such a situation, they are the first to come up with information. Remember when Kenyan forces went into Somalia and KDF established a direct, desk. They already had a desk, but they revamped their communication desk. They put up a colonel, and the colonel was coming to give briefs, and the colonel was accessible, and there was a major who was also accessible to the media. So any information that you want, you have a way of getting. You know who to ask. So whatever information, other information that you get, you always, as a journalist, want to refer to either the major or the colonel to ask, is this actually what's happening? And they are that way able to manage. But after that, they stopped. I think that's what they should, come back to and make sure that this is what we are constantly doing, that we manage all our information, that everything that comes out of government, whatever arm of government, is our story.
It's our story. Victor, given that obviously the government is slow, whether for obvious reasons or whether it's by design, should we then take that role of ensuring that information is out there regardless, but would be putting ourselves at risk, obviously quoting an incident like this that happened to Joy?
Those are challenges. I know, for example, Joy was at home. Remember, he had not gone for an official assignment.
She was not on duty.
And these are some of the challenges we are telling some of our colleagues in government and security agencies, that both within the agencies, there are also Kenyans who has a brother killed like I remember in Mpeketoni, we lost one of the KDF soldiers, came from my village. And we had lost this young man. He had already sent a text to the wife. So when we are talking about people who have been killed in Mpeketoni, we are talking from a person we know who had died, who had already communicated, is a guy who I went to school with. So the era of hiding is no longer there. That even in like, for example, what's happening in Uganda, Doreen is also a resident. What happened? So how do you then keep quiet? So we'll keep getting these leaks from wherever. You can't hold on to information. So that's a wake-up call. And I know government, like for example in Kenya, a lot of effort is going on into that, because the issue is that there are officers, yes, but there has not been serious investment and focus on how to empower them and allow them talk. So one of the things that is happening, I know there's now a public communication strategy that the government has already formulated and implemented. I know there's a team being set up at the Ministry of Information, a government communication team that will be dealing in line with what he's mentioning, proactive disclosure of information, that we need to be releasing information before even it becomes a crisis, even because there are some of the things are purely routine things that there's no secret about them. Right. If you shared in time, but when you continue hiding, media would continue either looking for the information People will continue doing speculative reporting because media can't and other people can't. Remember, there's a lot of competition now with like citizen journalists who want. Remember, some of the citizen journalists have no even responsibility. They have never gone to those ethics and all. So they will not wait and hold on like traditional journalists.
Without even knowing what to post and what not to post.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's why you remember in the Security Amendment Act, one of the actions they had introduced is that you can't share a photo from such a, and without going through the police department and vetting and being released. Very traditional thinking, I mean. But some of these, that law is targeting journalists. But like we are saying, the onset of citizen journalists makes it very complicated. So the challenge is that our security agencies must wake up to the situation and realize that now there are multiple sources of information. You can no longer hide things for some time.
Evidently, Victor, they're not going to wake up because it might be that they have planned to have it that way. Should we then push for them to wake up?
Yes, and traditionally, even if government was to start proactive disclosure information, it's the duty of journalists, because they will be giving procedural routine information. Right. There are some information that journalists still, and now with an access to information law in Kenya, we want to see more journalists utilizing that law to demand within law some of these information, because Article 35 of the Constitution allows. And now we have an access to information law, the Priscilla Nyokabi law. So let's see people, because some of these information like security, while in some cases there's justifiable reasons for national security, but many of the times it has been used just to hide information. You remember the cases of the Novel versus passenger ship that we bought for our Navy,
right.
Because purely it was done under those. So we need journalists to continue asking professionally, pushing for some of this information.
Okay, now good word you use there, professionally, because now the other thing we want to look at is, and this is to your door, and maybe we can have the discussion, is the fact that, like Latif had mentioned, most governments now are realizing the importance of having a communications department. So what they're doing, some of them, is actually employing journalists to be part of the communication team. How professional is a journalist when you're in that environment? Because again, they're turning to be spin doctors. They're now the ones who are being used to tell the story or the narrative of the government, as opposed to now being the professional journalists of giving the real information on the ground.
I think what needs to be done is that the journalists, actually people who are taking up these very critical positions, they must adjust and understand that it's no longer the business as usual. Like Victor has said, we'll now have access to information law, and we also have a constitution that allows the public to access any information that the government has, which they feel is useful to them. And therefore, the journalists who are taking up these positions, they must now also open up. They should also help us to open up those communication channels to ensure that there is flow of information in a professional manner, so that the moment you allow the public now to start exerting pressure on you to release that information, that's where the things go wrong. But if they can start it, or they can be proactive enough to make sure that this information gets out as soon as possible, then we wouldn't be having this back and forth or this.
But practically, is it possible to have you as a journalist working in an environment and giving information that maybe your employer does not want you to give?
You see, it's the responsibility of this journalist, of this communication officer, to advise your employer, to tell the employer the risks and the consequences of holding this information. But now the problem is, sometimes you realize that people who are given this position, they do not want to tell their employers the truth. Also, they want us, they get mixed up in that confusion also. So by the end of the day, they are not helping. But what is important is that you must sit down and tell your employer that if we do not give this information, this is going to be we are going to now to allow speculations and rumors start going around. Once you allow that, then you're also you're not helping the organization. But by releasing information timely, then you're also helping that organization and your employer.
Eric?
It'll get to a point, I think, where if we get serious media practitioners at high levels of government who already understand the importance and the benefits of proactive sharing of information, then it'll trickle down. You see, if it's coming from a point where, yes, a journalist has been employed, but this journalist has gone and is now a media or communication officer, but to a senior level of assistant secretaries and up to the principal secretary, everybody else is still a cake, or so to speak. It's very hard to convince them. It's going to be a push. But I think if we get to a level where, people who understand the importance of this, people who understand the importance of communication are at decision-making levels, then they're the ones who start pushing and saying, yes, this is the information we need. Let's sit down. Let's look at our strategy of communicating to the public. Let's see how do we rope in the public. Let's see the benefits. At what point do we sit back and say, how do we spin this? Because spinning is part of the job, right? We must accept that spinning is part of the job. At what point do we sit and spin, and how far can we spin this? How far can we make sure that, you know, even if there's a negative aspect to the story, we highlight the positive more? Yeah.
But is spinning something that comes under a professional way of acting for a journalist?
I think even the law, outside the journalistic expectation, even the law, if you read the County Government Act, for example, thing Article 17, it talks about public communication, credible information, so that you give information that is credible, and there are sanctions against giving wrong information. And part of the training, at least I've had with the police officers, and which we are continuing, I think I've seen such, is how do you give credible information? That you can continue giving credible information while at the same time hiding what you think should not come out at this level. Because journalists are professional human beings. And they will be told, for this reason, hold on to this information for this reason. And like you said, the KDF in Somalia initially, people understood why we have the information, but why we should give it incrementally. But when you continue hiding, and that's part of the challenge. I've talked to directors of communication, for example, from the counties. Quite a number of them are so frustrated, those who are working with the governors and the rest, because the attitude is, nyinyi watu ya magazeti. You know, that attitude, even within our own government system, that even people with PhDs who are communication guys or journalists, but the view is that nyinyi watu ya magazeti, you know, so that sometimes people are just earning. You have a professional role, but when it comes to the table, nobody listens to what you are saying. So that's the attitude we are requesting senior government officers to start changing. That, and even in communication, in PR schools, we are taught that communication is part of management. And why was it elevated? Because if you are going to involve communication and credible information, it helps you. It helps you in understanding, engaging the mood, in communicating appropriately, and people understanding you. But one is, we want to hide in spinning. But more importantly, also, our journalists need to do more, just like how you started. Journalists and editors need to sieve out some of these spins and actual information. Because what is now happening, especially on our weekend publications, is that purely fiction writing. You read a lot of literature that has impeccable sources close to, sources familiar with, and
undisclosed sources.
Yes, so, and most of these these spin things we are talking about. And if people ask a bit hard questions, I mean, because we are purely doing reportorial work. Somebody last week, 1 or 2, 3 weeks ago, Honorable Moses Wetangula goes to Mombasa and introduces another guy as Secretary General for Ford Kenya. When everybody knows in the constitutional election, Honorable Seli is the secretary, and we just say, when were elections done? So we also need to assert ourselves as journalists and ask sometimes hard questions, prepare ourselves, because nobody is going to give you space for free. Even those of us who work in government as communication officers, and we need to assert ourselves so that we are not just left to be told to spin wrong things and say, tell them the truth. If they refuse, but we have advised. And I've seen this happening elsewhere, and it has helped a lot of government departments which value communication. The challenge again is that most of the government departments and institutions have almost outsourced their communication departments. So that they have communication officers and directors inside, but they don't trust them. They have hired all PR and related companies. So people who are doing communication on behalf of public agencies are purely strangers to what is happening.
To what is going on.
What's happening in most of the government agencies. And there's that frustration now. You talk to them, they will tell you, they decided to ignore us. So which is not very... So some of the marchers, some of them have changed, but quite a number of them are still hold on to their journalistic, profession, but they are frustrated, and for that they have given up.
And now, with Kenya Media Council of Kenya and Kenya Union of Journalists, there should be some kind of way of, let me not call it punishing, but dealing with journalists who possibly are not adhering to some of the regulations that you'd expect for the, journalism to be kept professional. what punitive action can be taken or would be taken for those who possibly would go against that line of not doing their research, not giving stories that are not verified? Because we'll come to that, of course, with the social media age. There's a lot of information that goes out there, and we are also in a very competitive space where you want to be the first one to break the story, where you may end up now giving up information, then apologizing later. What action can be taken?
I think action can be taken. If you look at the Media Act 2013, actually it's the first time in our laws we have a code of conduct for the practice of journalism being put in the law. And therefore, if there is any journalist who goes against the code of conduct, then the Media Council of Kenya has got a right and the powers actually to take action against that journalist. We recently, right now, I think there is the Media Council Complaints Commission that is actually supposed to be dealing with such cases. So that is why the council was established, so that if you have a complaint against a journalist, then you can channel that complaint to the Media Council of Kenya. Then adjudication will be done.
Okay.
It's a long process, but I think, let's be honest, it's a good start. You know, before this, we did not have some of these. We didn't have the Media Council. We didn't have a strong Media Council. We didn't have a complaints commission. A member of the public who felt aggrieved did not know how to address the media. Now, the other challenge would be, if, for example, like he's saying, you know, a story has actually gone ahead and has been broadcast or has been published. There's a journalist, then there's a whole team. There's an entire editorial team, and there's a whole media house. So who is the Media Council going to take action against? Is it the media house? Is it the editorial? Is it the journalist who wrote the story? And that's when now you start having a clash between Media Council and media houses. And now, I think that's one of the...
A big challenge, yeah.
That's so one of the big wheels that, you know, have to grind slowly, but they'll have to get there. You know, at the point where the Media Council is able to exert itself and say, this is the code of ethics. You have broken code of ethics. And media house does not start fighting back and saying, you know, even this Media Council is useless, you know, this Media Council is, is a government
but
tool.
for sure.
I remember one of the cases. It's a challenge, what we are raising, even because now we are requiring internal editorial to also be strict, in the sense that some of the mistakes that then end up at the Media Council are things that would have ordinarily been handled within the media house. And that's why people are pushing now for the issues of ombudsman, public editors, so that media houses have internal controls. By the time a case reaches the Media Council, some things have been done internally to ensure that this will not... Because I remember one of the media houses when we picked up an issue with them when somebody had raised, and somebody asked statistically and asked, how many has Media Council also become an editorial house where how many journalists are at the Media Council, by the way, you know,
Start fighting back.
Fighting back, and I remember that's one of that acceptance for sure. Out of all the provisions in the Act, like disbursement, we can withdraw the card for Media Council. We can publicly, that's name and shame, it's allowed in the law. We can fine you up to 250,000 shillings. We can stop you from working. Those are provided for in the law in terms of what action can be taken. Okay. But this will need a lot of teamwork in the sense of what are internal media house policies doing to ensure that adherence. Because there are media houses which do not even have an editorial policy. There are media houses where, I can tell you, because and we have worked with Eric, there are people who have never seen the code of ethics for the practice of journalism. Because code of ethics is not taught in most of our colleges, other than I think Maseno University and one. They teach media law, which is very separate from the media law, the code of ethics has been provided in the law.
In the Act,
Most of our journalists are employed on phone. You work from Okwale or Busia, you are told, start reporting for us. So you start reporting. So you have never interacted with the code of ethics. You have never been oriented in your own media house.
Yes.
So we have a lot of journalists outside there who have never seen or heard about
Actually, I don't even know if they qualify to be called journalists. And this is where now we need KUJ and Media Council of Kenya to come in and professionalize or put stringent measures in place so that when somebody is called a journalist, then they have to have qualified in a certain way. And that brings me to the next point. And Latif, I know you do work a lot on the digital platform. And the challenge that is there now is with citizen journalism. They'll post things, and because as a media house, we're still recognized, I hope we are, as the authority. Once a media house has posted, then this comes out as gospel truth, as opposed to something that you read on somebody's Facebook page. How do you overcome the challenge of verifying information and ensuring that it is accurate? And giving now the right story.
As citizen journalists or as consumer?
No, as
or
now
media?
professional journalists. Because now we're trying to distinguish between information that is just out there
Yes.
and now a journalist who has given information. Yeah.
I think a journalist who's been given information has to still go through the line that you have been taught, how to verify your information, how to get both sides of the story, how to report the story. And once we start deviating from that, that's when the risk comes in. And, well, the gatekeepers, of course, is the editors. And the editors must make sure that the story that you're bringing is completely verified. Now, the challenge, of course, has been there, and you've seen it many times, what you kept saying, the need to be the first with a story. I think it's about time that media houses just stopped thinking of being the first with a story in the essence of being the first with a story out in the public. But you should be the first with a correct story out in the public. When we get a lot of, let's say an accident has happened somewhere and somebody has just posted, and then somebody else posts a video of, this is what has happened on the ground, and you take that and you run with it without verifying. Kumbe, that happened in Congo. And we've seen this many times before. It happened 5 years ago in DRC, and then someone has started spreading it, and it's gone, it's become viral. This is what's happening, and the media house also takes it up and says, this is actually what we have picked from one of our audiences. This is what they're saying is happening on the ground. It's wrong. The media houses still need to go back to the level of, we tell our story. We tell our story, the story that we know, not the story that anybody else knows. Mm-hmm. So we know this because we have gotten leads. Of course, social media is now a lead. You've gotten a lead. You've seen there's something that people are saying, ABCD has happened. Can we now go there and verify? A house is collapsing. We are seeing pictures of a house collapsing. I don't know, the column is going down. No, before you start reporting that there are reports of a house collapsing, can you verify? Can you send your reporter on the ground? Can your reporter tell you, yes, what we have seen is actually true. That picture that you've seen is the real picture. Here, I'm sending you another picture. It's true. Then now you start reporting and saying a house is collapsing. Same way, whatever had happened earlier, ignore that. Ignore what people are saying. At some point, of course, we get to a point where people are saying, really, KTN, you're telling us this now. We knew about this 2 hours ago. Yeah. Today, you'll know about it 2 hours earlier. But tomorrow, you'll have been lied to for 2 hours. And I'll come and tell you the truth. That's the principle, I think, that we should stick by.
Okay, Odur, maybe how do we get that balance? Because the hunger to be the one breaking the story is obviously, possibly has an attachment to the fact that we are the ones who broke it, whether that has a financial implication or whatever. But at the same time, I don't know what you'd find more important, to break the story or to be the media house that is always known for the credible story. It may take an hour to break it or to bring the info, but once you get it on this platform, then it is as good as the truth.
Yes, like Eric has stated, the process of producing news cannot change. We must go through the process. Whether we want to be the first one to break the news, we want to be the first one to put the story on social media or in any other platform, the process of production should never change. We must make sure that the story that is going to be put out there must go through the production process to ensure that quality checks are actually in place. So by the time you are giving out this information, you will not again go out there and start apologizing or withdrawing that story so that you can give the correct story. So what is important is that the professional standards, we must stick to professional standards at all levels. And again, that also brings us to the issues of making sure that even within our newsrooms or our media organizations, we have professionals doing this job. Victor has just said here, and I keep using that example, that the problem we have, especially out there, especially in the counties, we have journalists who are usually hired on phone and also fired on phone. So by the time this journalist has been hired on phone, he does not even know how his editor looks like. I remember there's this story whereby I had a journalist coming from one of the counties coming to meet his editor in Nairobi. Then there's an MP who had organized a meeting. So this journalist was meeting this MP and his editor. So it's the MP who was doing the introduction, that this is so-and-so, and this is so. Yes, exactly. This is editors here. And so that's your boss. Exactly. And it's ridiculous. So what matters is to ensure that we have professionals doing the job. So long as we do not stick to those standards, then by the end of the day, the media will stand accused.
Okay. And that brings me now to the next point where we're looking at, right here on KTN News, we've begun what we're calling 47 days of accountability. accountability. And this is literally just giving a clearer picture of the Auditor General's report on the different counties, county by county. We've done Kisumu. Today we are on Kiambu County. And the challenge, maybe Victor, that we may have also is when you look at the county level, we have what we're calling the telephone journalists. And possibly those telephone journalists have been employed, in quotes, by the county government. How do we ensure that the spread of journalists, genuine journalists, are not just within the city, and also at the county level, they're able to give us a credible, good story regarding the county government, regardless of how bad it may be?
Thanks, Mark. One, like my colleagues have said, Eric, both the Erics, is the story is in the details. The breaking of the story might not matter much, but the story is in the details. What other details do you have that are different? So even as we move with online journalism, principles of journalism remain the same, both online or offline. The story is in the detail, and I've seen some media houses that have strictly said in their policies that they will rather come 2 days later or 2 hours, but with the correct story, rather than breaking. Two, what you are raising puts upon a lot of pressure on media houses, that we must invest in capacity building for our journalists. When somebody identifies themselves to be a KTN reporter or correspondent, he must have been some minimums, even at a media level, so that we avoid these things of media workers and half-baked journalists, whatever we are calling them. We must invest in building the capacity of some. Some of these guys are very good, talented, highly educated, but they lack exposure, they lack some of this experience some of you have gone through. So what they are doing, we are calling them the council, the move-ins and move-outs. They have employed or they're consultants for MCAs and the rest, but half they are also whatever. So one time they are employees. So we need also to be sure that as we do this county analysis and what, we are dealing with people, either county government employees or our own correspondents who have gone through some minimum verification and standard setting. So that what is the template we are using at KTN when we are running the 47 counties, so that we don't go to counties and get more stories in depth. In the other counties, we are doing PR for other counties. Because that's like if we don't have a template that would guide us in what are the issues that are we raising from. Because Auditor General has raised quite a number of varied issues. But even looking at the context from which county are you reporting from, understanding, and what this means or implication means would help people in understanding. Because not all the 47 counties are the same. They have different challenges. They might have a reason why there's 50 million for Busa and Burial more than other counties. So the context, understanding of the context, and my advice again would be, as we deal with those journalists, hired journalists, and the counties, we need just to be cautious with the kind of information they are giving us, because what is happening in the counties is that there's a panic mode. Most of the governors have panicked because of these reports, and quite a number of them are now using a lot of money to manage what kind of information. And some of them would be calling even KTN to request which journalists should go to interview them and which journalists should cover their county. And that already tells. So we need very tough hard editors. Most of them will be coming with huge adverts. You're already seeing, so that they run, so that you go slow on them. So once KTN has decided, that's the way they are going. Truthful
to go full throttle.
Go full throttle. Make sure that you also ensure your safety of your journalists that are working in those various counties, because we're already seeing in some counties journalists being already harassed because of those stories you are running, at least I've received. So to me, I'm happy that KTN and others, because previously people have said we have not been giving good coverage to issues that affect our country. But so far, corruption issues, most of the 2-3 media houses have taken a serious stand, and consistency and persistency and the manner they are reporting. And we quickly now seeing audiences again being happy and coming back gradually to say, Kumbe media have just been sleeping, they can do it. We want them to maintain the momentum, hold on to issues, coverage, persistency, so that at least we again redeem our image. And especially as we move towards an election again, we also just need to be cautious about lip journalism. There are people who are interested in some of these stories who might want to influence the way we want to. So to me, we are happy.
Okay. Latif, the story on corruption, which has been going on for a while, and when you look at the dailies, it seems to be getting murkier by the day because it's now become a blame game and again trying to separate the he said, she said kind of journalism to facts and figures and what is there. Are we doing a good job so far? And maybe even if we were to be specific, looking at the NYS scandal, which started off with 791 million shillings. Right now, I'm not sure we even know how much.
The challenge is still on media houses. And I think what we've said before, this commercial aspect of media houses is also a big hindrance to media being objective. Media's objectivity is, coming to the point of, I need to sell them. I need to sell the paper. Or I need people to watch my news. So I have to have a catchy headline. I have to have a catchy fast story. The story of blame game, one after the other, is not really the story. The story is the issue. And, like when you start now going to the 47 days and the 47 days of accountability, it should not be about governor has said versus senator has countered or senator has attacked and then the governor has responded. It should be, this is what the auditor is saying and this is the story. Now, that's where I think that balance comes in. You'll find that story has been given, a good full page, coverage, but it's full page on page 7. And the headline that actually takes you to that page 7, it's on the front page. And the front page headline is Raila hits at Ruto, Ruto hits at Waiguru. And that's not actually the story. We're still talking about the NYS. How much money has been lost? How much money have we found? How much money can we account for? How much money has been brought to the fore? Who, where, when, how? That's the story. That commercialization is, in my opinion, is a big hindrance to telling the story. Because once we start putting that headline there, that it's Ruto versus Raila, or that it's Waiguru versus Ruto, or that it's Murkomen versus Waiguru, then we lose it completely. So the focus now starts shifting to those two personalities as opposed to the issue.
Victor, you wanted to say something on that?
And what I would encourage our media house and journalists to do, to treat this Auditor General report as triggers, as tips to a big story. And let's see, not just reproduction of the auditor reports. Because there's already the report, people have it. But can we add human interest, human angle to those stories? If somebody says Busia or Bungoma County allocated 100 million to a bridge that is not there, or some bridge, can we get a photo of that bridge or whatever it is? Then
and maybe the inconvenience.
The wheelbarrow. Let people search, because when people say maybe what a particular county allocated 100 million to some gate or whatever it is, let media go out and get some of those things, because it will help in telling the story. Because the amounts might not matter, because sometimes amounts vary, sometimes, But let's see, when somebody says he bought a loaf of bread at 100 shillings or 200 shillings, and it's super loaf, let's see it. It starts, because in the village where most of us come from, Mombasa and I come from, when you talk about 100 million or 1.6 billion shillings was lost.
Those two are the same.
And it doesn't sell. Home, they tell me in Surienyu and Nairobi, because they don't relate to the billion. And people are, but if you break that's 1.6 billion and say, if this school in your village or this borehole costed 100 million or 20 million, and somebody has told worthy 20 million, it makes a lot of sense. Somebody starts seeing the sense of how much. So let's break down the figures. Let's contextualize. Let's show case studies.
Actually, what should happen is that we must now again reinvest in investigative journalism. And actually, that's what's happening. He had complained about reading weekend newspapers. Nowadays, you don't even need to read weekend newspapers, because you are not going to get the kind of information you are looking for from a weekend newspaper the way it used to be 10, 15 years ago. So what used to happen is the best thing that has ever happened probably to the media in this country is the establishment of the Office of Auditor General, if we are talking about corruption.
Right.
What you need to do is make sure that you always have these reports. You go through these reports, then sit down and do thorough work, so that by the time you are submitting a story for publication or for being aired on TV or radio or being put on the social media, you have a story that somebody can relate with. No, because I know probably as human beings sometimes we are challenged when it comes to figures. Because if you put a figure there, 1.6 billion lost, so what? People want to know, how do you break down if For example, if you are to break down 1.6 billion that have been lost, what can the 1.6 billion do to change your life? What was it meant to do that he did not, it was not used to do that job? So that's kind of the stories that people want. But the problem is, like I said, probably is a challenge to the media owners and the investors that we are no longer investing in the quality journalism. We are about who goes out first and how are we going to put the newspaper out there and who sells the newspaper first. That's why you'll find out from newspaper, Raila will be in the headline because Raila sells a newspaper. Exactly, but we are not probably putting a lot of emphasis on the information we are putting out there to the public. How is this information going to help the public? And probably that's the reason why sometimes you can see the media being bashed even on the social media, that we are no longer have confidence and trust in the media the way we used to be because of the information we are getting right now. You get a newspaper, you read it from the first page to the last, from page 1 to the last page, you are not getting the kind of information you are looking for. Probably you are just getting something that you also read in a report, because by the end of the day, by the way, these reports are all over. A report has been released by Auditor General, then it is online. Anybody can go and access it. So what is required of a journalist is now make this report relevant to the people who are going to read the stories or who are going to watch or listen to the stories that are going to come out from the report.
All right, Latif, do you think there's a challenge? Because one of the challenges I know that media houses have is capacity. And this is to do with even just the numbers that we have in terms of good journalists. So you'll find maybe at some point we need to specialize. If it's doing facts and figures, you have somebody who's good with their math and is able to break it down, whereas you have another one who deals with health. But currently what happens, you'll find most journalists will, today you're dealing with health, tomorrow you'll be on a corruption story, the next day you'll be dealing with maybe something to do with the African Union. Does that maybe not give us enough time to do and have the history that we need to give a good story, the gravitas that it requires?
Yes, it does. What Odor is saying, in terms of investment, and remember we had this conversation a couple of weeks back with Duncan Kayemba, and I was saying, NYS scandal. I mean, for how long have we heard about NYS? So what new do we, is there any information that has actually been sourced,
that's new,
that has been sourced by a media house, that has been brought, this is exclusively sourced by a media house as our investigation has revealed this? Or are we just copying, pasting and, saying, attending events, attending public account committee meetings, attending rallies and reading petitions and coming and reporting, Investing in getting the in-depth story is not an easy thing. And it's not something that, we can also wish it away. We have to get to a level where I think media houses themselves have to decide that, yes, we have a desk, and this desk is investigative. Investigation goes beyond just having that one reporter who goes out there. It also has to have a support team, researchers, people who are sitting there and they're looking at the background. So, yes, you've come with this information. That information already, you can easily verify it because you have background data. It takes a lot of effort, and it takes dedication by the media house to make sure that we can do this and we want to get the story done. However, also at the same time, like you said, in terms of capacity and all, that also puts pressure on the colleges and universities that are training journalists and bringing the journalists out into the job market. What kind of collaborations can you have? This is our demand as a job market. This is what we expect you to produce as the universities. So that, also the students who are in universities are already being taught on how to go deeper into a story. Journalists are coming into newsrooms and the only thing that they know, they actually don't even know how to write an intro. The only thing that they know is that I'm going to write a story. I'm going to cover. So they are learning from scratch. When they come into the newsroom, they are learning from scratch. They have to be taught, this is your intro. No, this is not the intro. This is how you write an intro. This is how you advance the story. This is how... That should have happened in school. So in terms of capacity, it's a big challenge.
And sometimes special assignments. You remember the special pullouts, pull that sometimes you just give a reporter some 1 week or two to work on something. Because like the Auditor General report, we don't need any other investigation. The report is already there giving you leads. So we just need somebody to concentrate. Look at it. I mean, how much that, for example, Nation spend on John Kamau. He takes time. He gets back to all document, research skills, and just picks and connects.
One story a week.
Yes, and So how are media houses plan? These are things that cannot come haphazard. We must invest in them. We must plan through them. We must have a team of colleagues, mentors who help journalists, the coming ones, the new ones, to grow and understand the nuts and bolts of the profession. So we need to invest. The seniors like you guys, you need to invest. We need to look at the young guys who are coming in as people we need to help, not as competitors or useless guys, but guys who need guidance and guys we need to invest. It might not even be money. It might just the time you sit with him, 30 minutes to help him.
And mentor.
And mentor them. So those are things we need to invest in.
Here's a challenge, though.
And
you
as
said,
we close,
you said about 15 years ago, we used to read the news, the weekend papers, and they had a lot of in-depth. The people who are writing 15 years ago, the people who are the managers, those 15 years ago, are now consultants and senior managers in the same organizations.
Right.
So what is it that has happened?
Yeah, we seem not to have a way of handing down and
Exactly.
also,
Is it the transition?
All right, gentlemen, we'll have to wind up right there. And this is because we also have 47 days of accountability, and we are concentrating on Kiambu County. So those of you from Kiambu County would like to know from you, has devolution worked for you? Secondly, are you holding your leaders accountable? And you, as a resident of Kiambu County, what have you done in order to ensure that you have that accountability? Gentlemen, thank you very much for the newsroom. But